the years, apart from development projects, the critical relationship between two countries and political interference has played a big role in threatening the very foundation of heritage sites. Hosting the village of UNESCO in the Kingdom of Bahrain, the forum witnessed the collaboration of multicultural minds from 30 countries, where the focus on 29 nominations of heritage sites would be intense over the period of the next 10 days.
First, I want to say Assalamu alaikum to all your viewers. It's wonderful to be here in Bahrain. This really is my second home. I feel I have been here several times. And the other thing I want to say is I am incredibly grateful to Sheikh Hamay for her hospitality, for her leadership, not only in Bahrain, but in the whole region. On behalf of all of us working for the preservation of cultural heritage. So it is truly a great pleasure for me to be here. You know, at the end of the day, cultural heritage is indispensable to our life. You know, we get our identity from our cultural heritage, our values from our cultural heritage. Our cultural heritage enriches how we see science, archaeology, economies, how we interact with each other, our relationship with nature. And so being here discussing cultural heritage is basically relevant to every aspect of our life. And this is why this is so important. And it's particularly important that Bahrain has managed to get this gathering here in Bahrain and in the Middle East, which also highlights the incredible richness and diversity of our own cultural heritage in this part of the world. So I'm happy to be here for several reasons. I'm also very happy to talk about the cultural heritage in Jordan. We have a lot in common with Bahrain. I represent the Petra National Trust, a civil society organization, which also brings me to the importance of having civil society organizations represented at this forum. And I've also had the honor of speaking at the youth forum earlier, and it's also incredible to see these young professionals committed to their cultural heritage, dedicated, wanting to make a difference in this world, and it really is a source of hope. You know, Jordan has 5 World Heritage Sites, and we are hoping to increase that list and really have several tentative sites on the tentative list with UNESCO. We're hoping to enhance our understanding of the best practices in management, in conservation. We're hoping to build alliances globally and regionally to help support preservation of cultural heritage, best management practices, and to really raise the voice of so many of us in this field to make a difference on the international scene as well. It's really such a pity to see all of this destruction, and it is incredibly painful, and it affects not only these incredible sites but people's memory. And I think this is primarily why these sites were destroyed, because at the end of the day, extremist ideologies want to erase anything before them and fill that gap with their own narrative. And that is also why cultural heritage is so important, because it allows us to have a very deep appreciation of diversity and to change the narrative, to go to an inclusive narrative, an identity that is based on thousands and thousands of years of history, different cultures, different religions, and for all of us to internalize this diversity as part of our own identity. So many of these sites are open, they're large, they're accessible, and it is incredibly difficult to control entries and exits into many of these incredible sites. And often the destruction happens um, before the governments are even aware of it. In many cases, it's where government structures have collapsed that extremist groups have come in to fill in the gap. So there is no mechanism for the protection of these sites. I think this is part of the reason why UNESCO has taken such a strong stand to develop risk management plans for cultural heritage sites, particularly those in conflict areas. And I think much more of a global effort is being put now into really mitigation efforts to prevent such a broad destruction of our cultural heritage. There's a role for everyone here. I think there is a role for local communities also to be empowered to understand the importance of cultural heritage and to be aware that they also have a role in protecting these sites. There's a role for civil society organizations. Again, when government structures are not strong enough or in place enough to do the protective work that they should do, civil society organizations can often help fill some of the gap. Not always. We've learned many lessons from this destruction. Regrettably, a lot of it is irreversible, but as a global community, we have gained an incredible understanding of truly how important these heritage sites are for us, for our history, for our identity. An identity that is based on thousands and thousands of years of history, different cultures, different religions, and for all of us to internalize this diversity as part of our own identity. So many of these sites are open, they're large, they're accessible, and it is incredibly difficult to control entries and exits into many of these incredible sites. And often the destruction happens before the governments are even aware of it. In many cases, it's where government structures have collapsed that extremist groups have come in to fill in the gap. So there is no mechanism for the protection of these sites. I think this is part of the reason why UNESCO has taken such a strong stand to develop risk management plans for cultural heritage sites, particularly those in conflict areas. And I think much more of a global effort is being put now into really mitigation efforts to prevent such a broad destruction of our cultural heritage. There's a role for everyone here. I think there is a role for local communities also to be empowered to understand the importance of cultural heritage and to be aware that they also have a role in protecting these sites. There's a role for civil society organizations. Again, when government structures are not strong enough or in place enough to do the protective work that they should do, civil society organizations can often help fill some of the gap. Not always. We've learned many lessons from this destruction. Regrettably, a lot of it is irreversible, but as a global community, we have gained an incredible understanding of truly how important these heritage sites are for us, for our history, for our identity, to build these bridges that connect people, to promote the ideals of peace and coexistence and respect for diversity. And also, it has really hit home very, very hard that we all need to be prepared with advanced planning, research, understanding, to develop plans to help protect these sites in times of conflict. So hopefully there are significant efforts to rebuild and try and salvage what we can in many, many areas. And it remains truly painful where heritage destruction is irreversible, but I think there are important lessons to be learned from what has happened, and that will hopefully help the international community and strengthen UNESCO's efforts to really protect heritage moving forward. You know, the rebuilding of many of these sites is a very complex process. Some of it involves actual rebuilding, some of it involves rehabilitation, and in some cases the destruction becomes part of the memory of the place as well, and the sort of evolving new realities that we have to live with. There's a huge program that UNESCO has planned for Mosul. It's going to take many, many, many years. There's a big international coalition that's supporting it. The United Arab Emirates is supporting it, and many other countries are putting a lot of support behind this initiative. It will have to start with the smallest steps, the demining, the access, and it will have to be done one section at a time. But I think it really allows us to see how we can come in as an international community under UNESCO's leadership to see what we can do in these sites to help rebuild and to help salvage what is left. It's going to be a very long process, but I think I am very hopeful that at least what can be salvaged will be salvaged at the end of the day. And really, heritage evolves, and heritage is about people. So it is very important that all of this translates to a better life for the people of Mosul, that it's a catalyst to begin to create an enabling environment for people to thrive, for people to have safety, and for people's well-being. So I think that is a very important component of the whole project. I mean, the risk management plans are plans, and it's always a hope that you never have to test your plan, I think. But the government of Iraq is going to have to also take a very strong role here as well. The safety and security of monuments, of places is always, in times of conflict, a very risky reality. And so it takes a lot of partners to bring it together. And there are always risks. At the end of the day, there are always risks. But with the support of the government of Iraq, of international organizations, and of the global community, I think we can put in place a plan that will help whoever is on the ground really to try and minimize the risk to these sites. And there have been many important lessons, but at the end of the day, there are also realities that we may not be able to have control of, and political realities that are perhaps bigger than one site and affect the safety and security of people throughout a country. And so that doesn't prevent us from making the first steps. That doesn't prevent us from putting in place the plans and the measures that will help reduce the risk. But we all live with risk every day of our lives, and we learn from the experiences that we have seen around the world. And I think there is much more of an awareness and an understanding of how important it is to rebuild and to reinvest in these places that are culturally so important to the people of the region and globally. And so I'm very hopeful that we can make the right steps in the right direction and put in the controls and the plans and the mitigation measures that will help prevent major disasters in the future. No, it didn't take so long. I think UNESCO came into Mosul really quite, I'm not sure of the date exactly, but soon after the destruction. It has just taken a very long time to put all the pieces in place, to get the support from the international community. It takes a while to get these plans into action. And particularly for Mosul, I think the destruction is so enormous that the plan really needed to be quite large in scope, and it takes a while to produce it. But I think UNESCO has been looking at Mosul since very early on, and it just has taken a number of years to put together the measures and the mechanisms and the support that was required to move forward on the plan. It was discussed this morning. The report by the director of the World Heritage Committee, the World Heritage Center, included references to Afghanistan and the experience in Afghanistan. Regrettably, for example, the Bamiyan Buddhas were destroyed beyond repair, and luckily we have the technology today to try and preserve the memory of the place if we can, because you cannot rebuild what has been destroyed there, for example, and that's a great loss and a great pity for all of us, for humanity, really. But at the end of the day, we do have technological innovations that enable us to preserve the memory of the place and how it once looked, and to use that to transmit the information to future generations. So they were talking about it today, that the use of technology in a site that has been destroyed beyond repair will be very important in preserving the memory of the place and in transmitting the information that that physically is no longer there. Incredible question, and it's, I think, a very important question and so relevant for everything that is happening at UNESCO and at these meetings. Politics always gets in the way, really it does, and it is the way things are, especially with an organization that's intergovernmental by definition. And so governments are going to bring in their agendas and their politics into the formula. We have international conventions, we have laws that we can fall back on that will help minimize the impact of the politics on the decisions that are taken. And so the World Heritage Convention, the operational guidelines are all outside the political framework and really guide the decisions and the mechanism of implementation that UNESCO adopts and works by. So that in many ways is an excellent thing to fall back on, that you have these international instruments that support the work of preservation. You also have civil society organizations which are always outside the scope of sort of governmental intervention, and UNESCO has been very open recently to incorporating, I think they took a decision last year, 2017, to open it to non-governmental organizations. And so now civil society is playing a very important role in the deliberations and has a seat at the table and can intervene in all of these discussions. And the agendas usually are focused on preservation. And so I think there are always political considerations, but I think there are some mechanisms in place that balance those political considerations. I don't know if anything can be successful in 1 year when we're talking about the revival of cities, when we're talking about the revival of enormous cultural heritage sites and dealing with really enormous losses. And so I think we are on the step towards rebuilding so much that really has been destroyed and lost over the years. And I think that's why this forum is important. It's important because everybody is sitting together, it's open debate, it's very transparent. You decide whether you're an observer, civil society organization, or a member state, what you put on the agenda. Your voice is heard across the board, decisions are taken unanimously, and so there is, or by everyone in the room, and so there is this opportunity for awareness raising, for putting things out there in the public's eye to really bring political and political will and attention to many of these issues, and at the same time to start processes that may take many, many years to complete. But this is why this process is also very important, because year after year after year, you can go back, you can revise your progress, you can get extended support, you can bring things to the attention of the world community where otherwise they wouldn't, they may have not been brought to the fore like that. And so in many ways, these multilateral settings are very important for all of us to engage in and to really put on the table the things that we feel are very important for us as countries for the preservation of our cultural heritage. Gosh, I know. I'm a very positive, hopeful person by nature, and so in many ways, I think 5 years down the line, we will see a significant difference in many of these sites, because we will have incredible documentation. We will utilize amazing technologies that we have today to preserve the memory and of these sites. There will be many areas which will be cleaned up, rehabilitated, and brought back to life. I would like to see people back in their homes, in their streets, really engaging in a more fulfilling way with these sites. And I'd like to see that in Mosul, I'd like to see that in Afghanistan, and everywhere else that you have destruction of cultural heritage site. So this is my hope, and I think it's probably something that we will definitely see 5 years moving forward. And along the way, every little step that we move forward towards that and towards raising awareness and towards making cultural heritage preservation an integral part of sustainable development and policy priorities on a global scale. Every little step forward in that direction is a very positive thing.